Jai Hind. In today's class, we will talk about Civil Defence Organization and National Disaster Management Authority. Established in India on 24th October 1941, two significant events took place after independence, which gave a major fillip to civil defence in India. Chinese aggression in November 1962 and the Indo-Pakistan conflict in September 1965, when the nation was subjected to enemy air attacks for the first time. Disasters disrupt progress and destroy the hard-earned fruits of painstaking developmental efforts, often pushing nations back by several decades. Thus, efficient management of disasters has received increased attention both within India and abroad. So the aim of today's class is to acquaint everyone about Civil Defence Organization and also to acquaint the class about the National Disaster Management Authority. A preview of today's class, it is divided into two parts. Part 1 will talk about Civil Defence Organization and their duties. Part 2, National Disaster Management Authority, NDMA. So let's get started with part 1 of Civil Defence Organization. The Civil Defence Act of India was enacted by Parliament on May 1968. Today, civil defence includes all measures for affording protection to any person, property, place in India or any part of the territory thereof against any hostile attack, whether from air, land, sea or other places, or for depriving any such attack of the whole or part of its effect. Civil defence is a much misunderstood subject because it is often confused with the air raid precautions taken during the war. There are many other measures necessary to deal with effects of direct and indirect raids, and such measures cannot be disassociated from the civil defence measures. Let's talk about civil defence measures now. Protective measures. Measures which may be taken before an air raid, such as dispersal of population and industries, camouflage, preparation of shelter, warning and training. Control measures. Measures taken immediately after the raid, such as reconnaissance, reporting of damage and unexploded bombs, rescue of casualties, control of services, clearance of debris and extinguishing of fires. Restorative measures. The measures which become necessary after an air raid include feeding, providing shelter and clothing, salvage of property, disposal of dead, disposal of unexploded bombs, control of infection and contamination, repair of damages caused to utility services, etc. Civil defence is primarily organized on voluntary basis except for a small nucleus of paid staff and establishment which is augmented during emergencies. Present target of civil defence volunteers is 12.49 lakhs, out of which 6 lakhs have already been raised and 4.8 lakhs have been trained. Volunteers are administered and trained by 68 deputy controllers, 17 medical officers and 503 civil defence instructors, which are full-time paid posts. Please note that these numbers are subject to change depending upon the need of the hour. At national level, Home Ministry has a direct control over the Directorate of Civil Defence, headed by a Director General, usually a senior police officer, to advise Home Ministry on matters of civil defence. Comprises of the Home Guards, NCC and the firefighting units. All central ministries have a civil defence cell which gets activated during emergency and is responsible for rendering special advice pertaining to their respective ministries to the Home Ministry. The Ministry of Defence and Railways are responsible for civil defence on properties owned or managed by them. The CDO has following 12 services in which volunteers are trained. Headquarters Service, which works under the control of Civil Defence. Wardens Service, link between the public and the authorities. Responsible for organizing self-help parties, fire parties, and report damages and guide homeless to the rest centers. Firefighting services detect small fires and put out the same. Casualty services. The function of this service are rendering of the first post on the spot, providing transport to casualties for short distances, to send various casualties for further treatment. Remember that first aid is to be given immediately without fail. Communication. This service is responsible for receipt and dissemination of air raid warning, provision of coordination and control facilities, provision of communication between warden posts, control centers through messengers or telephone, treatment. Rescue services. Responsible to rescue the injured and personnel trapped under the debris. Welfare services. Responsible to supply information about missing and dead, provide shelter and food and clothing. It also arranges evacuation from vulnerable areas. Depot and transport services. Responsible to send various services to the scene of the incident and provide the necessary transport required from time to time. Salvage services. Responsible to salvage the damaged property and keep it in safe custody. Corpse disposal service. It is responsible for collection, identification, and disposal of dead bodies. Supply service. It is responsible for planning, organizing, and procuring necessary equipment for CD services and its proper storage and quick distribution of equipment at the time of need. Besides the above noted services, the CDO sets up repair and demolition parties and make arrangements for the care of animals through appropriate existing agencies operating in the town. State level organization. Each state and union territory government has under the overall control of its IG of police, a Director General of Home Guards and Civil Defence. As in the case of the central government, he is a senior police officer and is responsible for controlling fire departments as well. District level organization. District Magistrate is the ultimate authority on civil defence. He is designated as the Controller of Civil Defence, responsible for implementation of all civil defence measures by the district departmental heads such as Civil Surgeon, Superintendent of Police, PWD Engineer, Publicity Officers. They are appointed by him as in charge of various civil defence services. Also constitutes an advisory committee out of the people possessing qualities of leadership and discipline who can arouse and sustain public interest in the civil defence services. India is vulnerable to a large number of natural as well as man-made disasters. We are talking about civil defence organization now. 58.6% of Indian landmass is prone to earthquakes of moderate to very high intensity. We have monitored around 7 earthquakes in Delhi so far during the lockdown phase also. Over 40 million hectares of land, 12% of the total land, is prone to floods and river erosion. Of the 7,516 kilometers long coastline, close to 5,700 kilometers is prone to cyclones and tsunamis. And let me just recall, in 2004, the tsunami that came in India had shaken the entire world, and it was an eye opener after which the Disaster Management Authority had taken a lead. These are some of the pictures of the natural disasters, but the question is, are we to be blamed for it? These are the pictures of the man made disasters. We all must have a clear cut picture of what are natural disasters and man made disasters. This will be taken in detail in the following sections and classes to follow. Civil defense volunteers have worked against COVID 19 during the current pandemic too. Amidst the coronavirus pandemic and nationwide lockdown, the hardest hit groups have been migrant workers, homeless, the poor, and the disadvantaged. Civil defense organization worked to organize shelter and distribution of food, water, essentials, and personal protective equipments to those that needed it the most in this time of need. Now, let us talk about the second part of today's class, that is National Disaster Management Authority. On December 2005, the Government of India took a defining step by enacting the Disaster Management Act of India, which envisaged the creation of the National Disaster Management Authority headed by the Prime Minister. At the national level, the NDMA is the apex body for disaster management and is headed by the Prime Minister. The NDMA is mandated to deal with all types of disasters, whether natural or man made. NDMA is responsible for laying down policies, plans, and guidelines for disaster management and coordinate their enforcement and implementation for ensuring timely and effective response to disasters. Organization of NDMA. It approves the National Disaster Management Plans and Disaster Management Plans of the central ministries or departments. Take such measures as it may consider necessary for the prevention of disasters or mitigation or preparedness and capacity building for dealing with a threatening disaster situation or disaster. Central ministries or departments and state governments will extend necessary cooperation and assistance to NDMA for carrying out its mandate. Oversee the provision and application of funds for mitigation and preparedness measures. NDMA has the power to authorize the departments or authorities concerned to make emergency procurement of provisions or materials for rescue and relief in a threatening disaster situation or disaster. Exercise superintendence, direction and control of the National Disaster Response Force, that is NDRF. It lays down framework of broad policies and guidelines for working of the National Institute of Disaster Management, that is NIDM. National Executive Committee, NEC. It is the executive committee of NDMA and is mandated to assist the NDMA in the discharge of its functions and also ensure compliance of the directions issued by the central government. Coordinate the response in the event of any threatening disaster situation or disaster. NEC comprises the Union Home Secretary as chairperson. The members of NEC, National Executive Committee, are secretaries of various important ministries, secretaries of various departments of the government, chief of the Integrated Defence Staff, chiefs of staff committee. Special invitees to the meeting of the NEC are secretaries in the Ministry of External Affairs, Earth Sciences, Human Resource Development, Mines, Shipping, Road, Transport and Highways. Secretary, NDMA. NEC is responsible to prepare the National Plan for Disaster Management based on the National Policy on Disaster Management. NEC will monitor the implementation of guidelines issued by NDMA. It will also perform such other functions as may be prescribed by the central government in consultation with the NDMA. State level, SDMA. SDMA by the Chief Minister is headed by the Chief Minister, who will lay down policies and plans for disaster management in the state. It approves the state plan in accordance with the guidelines laid down by the NDMA, coordinate the implementation of the state plan, recommends provision of funds for mitigation and preparedness measures, and review the developmental plans of the different departments of the state to ensure the integration of prevention, preparedness and mitigation measures. The state government constitutes a state executive committee to assist the SDMA in the performance of its functions. The state level SDMA is headed by the Chief Secretary to the state government and will coordinate and monitor the implementation of the national policy, the national plan, and the state plan. It provides information to the NDMA relating to the different aspects of the disaster management. Now, District Level Management Authority, that is DDMA, headed by the District Collector or Deputy Commissioner or District Magistrate, as the case may be, with the elected representative of the local authority as the co-chairperson. It acts as the planning, coordinating and implementing body for DM at the district level and take all necessary measures laid down by the NDMA and SDMA, that is the National Disaster Management Authority and State Level Disaster Management Authority. It prepares the district DM plan for the district and monitor the implementation of the national policy, the state policy, the national plan, the state plan and the district plan. It ensures the guidelines for prevention, mitigation, preparedness and response measures laid down by the NDMA and SDMA are followed by all the departments of the state government at the district level and the local authorities in the district. Local authorities. They include Panchayat Raj institutions, municipalities, district and cantonment boards, and town planning authorities which control and manage civic services. These bodies ensure capacity building of their officers and employees for managing disasters, carry out relief, rehabilitation and reconstruction activities in the affected areas. It prepared DM plans in consonance with the guidelines of the NDMA, SDMA and DDMA. National Disaster Response Force, that is NDRF. For the purpose of specialized response to a threatening disaster situation, both natural and man-made, the Act has mandated the constitution of a National Disaster Response Force. Direction and control of this force is vested in and exercised by the NDMA, and the command and supervision of the force shall vest in an officer to be appointed by the central government as the Director General of Civil Defence and National Disaster Response Force. Presently, NDRF comprises of 8 battalions and further expansion may be considered in due course. These battalions are positioned at different locations as per requirement. NDRF units maintain close liaison with the designated state governments and are available to them in the event of any serious threatening disaster situation. While the handling of natural disasters rests with all the NDRF battalions, 4 battalions are equipped and trained to respond to situations arising out of CBRN emergencies. NDRF units also impart basic training to all the stakeholders identified by the state governments in their respective locations. To conclude, civil defense and disaster management are important activities both during peace or during war. NCC, with its vast trained resource, can play an important role and help in both the civil defense and the disaster management.